Everyone, welcome to Broadband News. The FCC has just announced some RDOF defaults that 4 service providers have defaulted on their commitments to provide broadband in 7 states, and that could impact about 100,000 locations. Be right back. Hey, thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband News. So this, I thought, was really surprising. I thought we were, I don't know why, but I thought we were done with RDOF defaults. But, because the FCC had made it clear back this past summer that they really wanted service providers who thought they were possibly going to be defaulting to make those announcements then, and certainly as quickly as possible, so that we did not impact as much the possibility that those locations could be served by BEAD money, because states are all kind of trying to figure out what they have to do now with BEAD funding. So these, like I say, just came out just a week or two ago. So we're going to take a look at this. So you see here the wireless, what is that again? WCB, Wireless something Bureau, I can't remember. We'll see it in a minute. Announces Mercury, PBT, Cable One, and Fidelity RDOF defaults. That's impacting Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, and New Mexico, Wireline Corporation. WCB announces Mercury and PBT will not fulfill commitment to serve certain RDOF census block groups in Indiana, Michigan, and New Mexico. So they're not saying they're going to pull out completely from there. But then Cable One, Fidelity, and Mercury withdrew from RDOF in Idaho, Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois, meaning that I think all of the bids that they had put forward in those states, they are defaulting on or pulling out of. So I linked to this as well as one other spot on here in the description of the video, and you can download the public notice, which I'm going to take a look at here in a moment. And this is in, I think that was the appendix, which we'll take a look at as well. So let's take a look at the public notice. So you see here, same thing basically as far as what's going on, but just going to read through a few things in here. So by this public notice, the Wireless Competition Bureau announces that certain census block groups are now eligible for other funding programs. So that would be, if there's some ARPA money left, capital projects fund, something like that. Most likely BEAD. Now, of course, the states have already been given their allocation of BEAD money based on most likely these locations being considered already committed, meaning that it was already thought that these would be covered by RDOF, and now it's not the case. So the states have these states have got a certain number of locations in each state that they're going to have to try to figure out how they're going to serve that with BEAD if that's what they're going to do. So that's an issue. And you can see here it was that we've got Mercury Wireless will not fulfill its commitment to offer broadband service to certain census block groups within Indiana and Michigan, Mercury Wireless Kansas, and all of the census block groups covered by its authorized winning bids in Illinois, Kansas, and Missouri. PVT Networks will not fulfill its commitment to service certain census block groups within New Mexico. Cable One, VoIP LLC, also known as Sparklight, and all of the census block groups covered by its authorized winning bids in Idaho, and Fidelity Cablevision LLC, and all of the cable block groups covered by its authorized winning bids in Missouri. The carriers will be subject to penalties as described below for their defaults. We also refer Mercury Indiana and Mercury Kansas defaults to the Enforcement Bureau for further consideration. It's interesting as we look at this, we're going to look at some of the numbers of the number of locations that they're pulling out of. And in some cases, like PBT and I think Fidelity Cablevision, it's not a huge number, but Mercury Wireless, the number of locations, oh my gosh, that they're pulling out of. So again, these are broadband locations in these census blocks that are now, if they don't have broadband now, states are going to have to figure out how they're going to cover that. And with the BEAD program, they're supposed to try to cover everything that they can in the state. So if they've been figuring on what they're going to cover and then suddenly the rug is pulled out from under them, that's not a good thing. Now, maybe they got some advance warning here from either the service provider or from the FCC. I think the FCC might have had some indications earlier that some of this was happening. So they certainly would have gotten the word to the state as quickly as possible. Although some defaults are after auctions are expected because of changing business plans or economic circumstances. So they are realizing there are changing economic circumstances since the auction took place. We expect carriers to live up to their deployment commitments, and those who fail to meet their obligations can jeopardize the opportunity to bring broadband to the promised areas and undermine the integrity of the programs. Such defaults are particularly regrettable when the carrier waits years after authorization to default, making it difficult to correct the problem and otherwise accommodate the defaulted areas in other deployment programs. As I've been saying, it makes it much more difficult for BEAD. On July 3rd, 2024, the Bureau released a public notice strongly encouraging carriers that were contemplating default to contact the Bureau as well as the relevant state or territory broadband offices and tribal governments as soon as possible to discuss their specific situation. We emphasize that early defaults ensure that states and territories timely receive the necessary information for their broadband equity access and deployment, or BEAD planning, and ensure that our sister federal agencies timely receive this information to target funding for their broadband deployment programs. That could mean, for example, the NTIA or maybe even the USDA for reconnect funds that might be available for some of these areas. So, and again, it mentions that it's very possible that some of these operators did reach out to the states early on and say, hey, we're thinking about pulling out. So maybe the states could take that into account as they were working on their challenges and what areas they thought were going to be actually committed and maybe realize they might not be. So it's very possible that was taken into account. I'm going to scroll through some of this. It talks about Mercury, Indiana PVT. I don't think that's the same PVT. I don't know. That was a little confusing. So in attachment A, available here, we provide a list of all the RDOF eligible census blocks contained within the census block groups Mercury, Indiana. Oh, that's two. They're talking about the two different operators here. Mercury, Indiana will not serve in Indiana and Michigan, and that PVT will not serve in Mexico pursuant to their RDOF obligations. And we'll take a quick look at that. So here is where you get a feeling of how many locations this is, especially considering Mercury. And this is just in Indiana. So this is a 189-page document. And each one of these is each one of these is a census block. So see, they're all Mercury Wireless Indiana here. You've got the state. These are all Indiana. You've got counties, and you've got census block numbers. So these are all census blocks. So I'm going to scroll down here very quickly. So this is all Mercury Wireless Indiana. I'm going to go all the way to the very last page, page 189. Page 189 is PVT Networks. So this is what PVT Networks is withdrawing from in New Mexico. And you've got these two counties, Chavez and Eddy. And then the rest, again, is Mercury Wireless, all the way up to page 1 here. We're on page 188. So 188 pages of these census blocks are all Mercury Wireless. So you can see the impact there that could happen, that could have. So in addition, we will also update the broadband funding map to remove these census blocks from Mercury, Indiana, and PVT's service areas. So again, the broadband map now that would be saying that these areas are served or committed, I should say, not necessarily served, but committed, where you've got committed funds, are no longer committed. So they are eligible for BEAD funding. And I'm assuming the states need to try to make that happen because they're supposed to try to cover every location in their state. While Mercury, Indiana, and PVT notified the Commission that they will not serve the identified census blocks, they are not withdrawing from RDOF in these states. So this was a little confusing to me, and I don't know completely how that works. So they're saying they're not withdrawing. So that I'm assuming that means that they have covered certain areas already. They're just saying that they're going to withdraw from certain census blocks. The Commission takes compliance with the terms and conditions of its high-cost program seriously and imposes non-compliance measures if the requirements are not met. Mercury, Indiana, and PVT remain subject to the program rules, including the applicable non-compliance measures for the duration of the support term, except as explained below, and remain committed to serve the eligible census blocks within the remaining CBGs and their supported service areas with voice and broadband service meeting program requirements. So I guess they're saying, okay, well, you're pulling out of certain census blocks, but you're committed to continue on through the commitment period, the 10-year term, to be able to get funding for those other census block groups that you've got. If Mercury, Indiana, or PVT fails to meet its interim service milestones by not serving the required number of locations based on its original authorized location totals, it will be placed in the associated non-compliance tier. At the end of the deployment period, we will apply this section to recover support for all unserved locations, including the locations covered by the identified census blocks. Any additional issues related to the support recovery required by that section of the Commission's rules will be addressed in a separate release. So I don't know if that, I don't know if that means that obviously they're going to have counted against them the ones where they're pulling out of. So I think what they're saying is they're going to figure out how much, what any penalties are at the end of all of this. As far as Cable One, Fidelity, and Mercury, Kansas, says we consider those to have defaulted on their RDOF service milestones in Idaho, Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois, respectively. These carriers will receive no further RDOF auction support payments and are subject to support recovery and non-compliant measures consistent with the Commission's rules. We also remove their RDOF service areas, or will remove their RDOF service areas from the broadband funding map. So I think here, money that's been paid out already to start deployment, if they had even started, would be clawed back, I think is what that's saying there. So that'll be looked into. And again, I'm assuming there'll be another release that will come out that will talk about what took place there. So I was going to look at a couple of other things real quickly. So this, I already looked at that. That's the big long list. This is a site where you can get more information about the RDOF fund, and specifically, you see here there's press releases like this. Here's the link to the release right there that I was looking at. Then there's also other public notices on here if you want to look at that, but also results. And on the results, I pulled up a couple of things. So you've got historical authorized 904 applicants data as of March 26, 2024. So earlier this year, shows all of the long form applicants. We'll take a quick look at that. Then you've also got, what do we have here? What was it I was looking at? Oh, yeah, here it is. Census blocks covered by auction defaults. That's updated as of November 27, 2024. So this would include what we're talking about today on these defaults. So this is the historical authorized long-form applications. So I was going to take a quick look here. So here we've got Cable One VoIP LLC, and you can see this is Idaho. So they had over $3.2 million. Looks interesting here that the winning bidder is Whisper Cabo 904 Consortium. So that was a consortium of bidders that they were in, and there's one other one here. We'll see that is also included in that. So Cable One VoIP LLC in Idaho, again, $3.2+ million. And I also wanted to look at the amount per location. So when we look at that $3.2+ million, 863 locations. So that's an average of $3,737.76 per location, which is not a lot. And that's over, you also have to consider this is over 10 years. So this is how much support they're getting over 10 years. So when they deploy this, they're going to get a tenth of that every year for 10 years. So that does make it a little bit difficult. But again, this was an auction. So the way RDOF worked, unlike, let's say, BEAD, where the money's going to the states, and then the states do their own kind of grant process and competitive grant process. This was a reverse auction. So each service provider, didn't go through the states, each service provider would go into the auction and say, here's how little I will accept. It was reverse because you're not bidding up, you're bidding down. You're saying, it's kind of like name that tune, right? I can name that tune in 5 notes. Well, I can name it in 4 notes. Well, I can build that broadband with $3,700. I can build it with $3,000. So they're all bidding down, trying to say how much they're willing to accept, or how little they're willing to accept, I should say. So they wound up here, I guess, as a total from all of those locations. If you just look at the average, that's an average. So, some of those locations, hopefully when they were trying to figure this out and doing their due diligence on what they could actually build and for how much, hopefully they were figuring, okay, well, we've got some really expensive areas and we've got these areas that aren't going to be so expensive. So hopefully they were bidding based on that. They specifically, like the others, but in their letter that they sent to the FCC, they were saying, hey, conditions changed after the auction, and they certainly did. I mean, you gotta understand that when the auction was finished, we had inflation that was at 2%, and it shot up to over 9% for a period of time, and it's come back down. But when inflation comes back down, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the prices of everything comes down. It just means the inflation rate has come down. So even though the inflation rate, which again was over 9% at one point, if it's come back down to, let's say, 2 or 3%, you still got that 9% of prices that got higher, and those don't necessarily come down. Now, some of it may have because the cost of gas has come down, and there could be that's lowered some prices a bit. But quite often, inflation is stubborn because you've already got the previous inflation rate built into the prices. And then as you continue to add 2 or 3%, it's not actually like prices are going down. They're still going up just a little bit again, except in cases where maybe something's really impacted by the price of fuel, those kinds of things. So they and everybody that bid in this auction were suffering from the fact that they put in bids way before, again, when inflation was very low, and it was low. Inflation was reasonably under control for a pretty good period of time, and then all of a sudden went nuts, because we had a pandemic after the auction, right? So these kinds of things, and you've got, midst of a pandemic, then you've got supply shortages, you've got lots of spending, trillions of spending from the government for recovery purposes, right, to try to get the economy back on track, and spending plus supply shortages all increase inflation. That's what we're seeing there, and that is a big impact on what these companies that are having to build based on RDOF and what they, again, deciding or bidding how little they would accept in support. They got kind of shortchanged here. And then we see others. Fidelity Cablevision, again, they didn't have a lot of locations, only 39 locations. They were only getting almost $38,000, nothing compared to a lot of these others. But they only had $973.82 allocated for each location. And again, that's over 10 years. So that's less than $100 per year. They're going to collect that over 10 years to build out a location. So that makes it difficult. Then who do we have here? We've got, this is Mercury Wireless. So again, you see some really low numbers here. Again, this is over 10 years. So here you've got $23.66 for these 29 locations. That's a 10-year period. They're going to get $23 over 10 years to build that. And you got 600, 500, 600, 482. So these guys, they underbid. That's the problem that we have here, is these guys underbid. Then you've got Ohio. I don't know. I thought I saw something in that FCC document where maybe the Ohio locations had already been transferred over to another Mercury Wireless LLC. I think it might have been Michigan. So maybe that's why that's not included in this particular one. Then we had PVT Networks, $316. Again, just $31 and roughly 68 cents over 10 years. But it's only 38 locations, 12,000. So they were not a huge winner here in RDOF, but they're pulling out because they're getting almost no money to have to do that, to build those locations. Then what do we have here? I was going to see I think I might have had something in here. Performance tier and latency. Yeah, okay. So you can see here, Mercury Wireless, for example, they were bidding. You could bid in RDOF, and the speed that you bid determined the weight. If you bid in the gigabit range, then there was less weight to your bid, meaning that your bid was not weighted down as much. If you bid in above baseline, there was a weight on that, and that would reduce your chance of winning over time. As the reverse auction continued through rounds, you would have a better shot at it. So they bid above baseline on some and gigabit on some. Above baseline what meant that you were bidding at 100 by 20. So again, this is pre-BEAD program. So the speeds for RDOF were baseline, which was 25 by 3, which is interesting. So the least you could bid for RDOF was baseline, 25 by 3, because that was considered the broadband definition at that point. So that is today considered served, but barely. So if you're between 25 by 3 and 100 by 20, then you're underserved, right? So we're trying to cover areas that are 25 by 3 with the BEAD funding, but we have to cover anything that's below 25 by 3 first, the unserved areas. So the baseline was 25 by 3. I don't think anybody bid baseline, but we did have some that bid above baseline, which meant they were committing to cover these areas with 100 by 20. So it would be considered served if they actually did 100 by 20. It would not qualify for BEAD funding, but obviously it's not gigabit. So they bid both, and you can see here the number of locations that they bid on each for above baseline. They've got the gigabit here, down here on those. So did I highlight these others? I don't know if I did. No, I was just highlighting them there. Then we had authorized census block. That's just a whole bunch of census blocks. Okay. And then there's this spreadsheet. This is the actual defaults. So I was going to show here that Cable One, they've got pre-authorized census blocks and post-authorized census blocks. So it's somebody like Cable One, for example, had one lots of different states, but prior to being authorized, so they received a ready-to-be authorized notification from the FCC that said, hey, we're ready to authorize you guys. You just need to do a few final things. I think that's what they're talking about here, one of which was to send in, I think, a letter of credit and some other things, a bankruptcy letter, that kind of thing, what they would do if there was bankruptcy. So they were pre-authorized for all of these states, but they did not, I think they pulled out prior to being fully authorized by the FCC. So you can see we have Arkansas here, Arizona, Iowa. We do have a bunch in Idaho that they had pulled out of prior. Then we've got Louisiana, Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico. I think Texas, Texas is in here. So these are all Cable One that they pulled out prior, and then Washington. And then we've got post-authorized. So there's 249 of those census blocks that they pulled out of. And then we've got post-authorized census blocks, and there's 275. And all of these are in Idaho with the exception of these last 4 that are Louisiana. So these 275, I think, are the ones that they're being addressed today. As not today, but in this particular public notice that I'm reading today. So you can see most of these are Idaho, and you can see the counties here and the census block number, that kind of thing. So the same thing with I think I saw the same thing with Mercury. If I can scroll down, so these are pretty long. These are all defaults, so you can see how many there were. LTD Broadband was huge, right? They defaulted. In fact, I don't think they were ever approved. That's why it's pre-authorized here. They were never even approved by the FCC because the FCC did not trust everything that they could do. They were actually the big winner in RDOF. They had won the most money, or I should say their bid had won the most money, but they were never approved because I think the FCC, when they were looking at them, decided they could not actually do what they said they were going to do. So here you got Mercury Wireless, and you can see these are all pre-authorized census blocks that in Indiana, this is all Indiana right here, Wyoming, I just saw Tennessee, Missouri, Wyoming. So they had quite a few that were pre-authorized, and then we've got the post-authorized for Mercury Wireless. I'm sure they're on here as well. You can see a bunch of charters. There you see Mercury Wireless, and you got Indiana again, Michigan. So that's what we're looking at with this most recent. And again, these are post-authorized. So these are the ones where it was after the FCC approved them and said, hey, yeah, you're approved, you're all set to go. And in this case, again, very, very late pulling out of these areas. And they were a big factor here on how many locations there are that are not going to be served, unfortunately. And as we saw from some of the numbers, they were seriously underbidding. So it's no wonder they won a lot of them. If you're going to bid, $400, $500 per average per location, and you've got others that are being a little bit more realistic. Even in those areas, they said they were going to provide gigabit. You've got others that are maybe looking at providing gigabit fiber or even gigabit wireless that are going to be saying, well, we can't go that low. So they might have been quite a bit higher, but more reasonable, and possibly could have served these areas if they had not undercut so much. So that's a big problem that we see there. And that was a big problem with RDOF because, again, you've got people that were supposed to be vetted, and it really, I think one of the criticisms was that these providers were not vetted beforehand. So that process took effect later, which then meant some, like I say, Starlink won a lot of money, but then the FCC decided not to approve them. We had LTD Broadband. We had Starry that was approved, but then declared bankruptcy. So all of their locations suddenly were put back in. And then we've got some others that, prior to BEAD funding going to states, they defaulted or pulled out. And then we had others after the BEAD money was determined and sent to the states, how much they would be getting, that pulled out. And now we've got this latest round. So again, that's not good for the states that have to try to figure out what to do with this now. Thanks for joining me today. If this was interesting or helpful, if you give me a thumbs up, I'd appreciate that. If you're not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button. Make sure that little bell is rung there to be notified when I'm live, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.